Now, we mentioned earlier that Trump was hoping to win more of the black vote. He put it this way in his convention speech.
And I say very modestly that I have done more for the African-American community than any president since Abraham Lincoln.
Very modestly, he says. Okay, that's a bit much. But does Trump have a genuine case to make that he's been good for the black community? To the wall!
Big, beautiful wall.
The Republican convention touted a number of ways this administration has helped black people. So let's start with
the first new major effort to tackle poverty in a generation. Opportunity zones.
Opportunity zones involve investors being given a capital gains tax cut for returns on investments in areas the government defines as economically distressed. The longer you invest, the bigger your tax cut. Now, 94% of capital gains go to people with incomes over $100,000. So that tax cut is going to rich people. But if the rich people are investing in poor areas, that's a win-win, right? Maybe. There's certainly investment happening, $10 billion before the COVID-19 crisis, but the vast majority of that investment appears to be in real estate, some of it luxury real estate, not local businesses. And the reason for that is if your entire incentive structure is capital gains tax cuts, investors are going to focus on capital gains. And most useful projects have a return of only 3 to 7%, not the 12 to 16% the market is looking for. Furthermore, there are some affluent areas within some of these poor census tracts. In fact, nearly 200 of the 8,800 opportunity zones are not even considered low income. So there's some loopholes there. And most investors freely admit their projects would have proceeded even without the opportunity zones. Look, I'm not trying to knock the program. It has done some good, but at this stage, it's a bit, could definitely do some tweaking. Next.
In historically black colleges and universities, I saved HBCUs. We saved them.
No, you didn't.
They were going out and we saved them.
Why don't we run that phrase through the Trump translation machine? We get, yeah. So, is that claim true? Well, in Trump's first 2 fiscal years, HBCUs received about $1.6 billion, which when you adjust that number for inflation, is almost exactly what they received under Obama's first 2 fiscal years. But then, at the end of 2019, Congress passed and Trump signed the Future Act, which guaranteed $85 million a year allocated to fund science, tech and maths programs at HBCUs. And on top of that, Betsy DeVos granted total forgiveness of Hurricane Katrina relief loans to 4 HBCUs that were worth more than $300 million. One of those university presidents was keen to point out that Obama could have done that, and he didn't. Finally, the CARES Act this year added another $450 million of funding for HBCUs. So, the Trump administration has done reasonably well in this area. Or, to put that in Trumpese, he single-handedly turned HBCUs from pathetic garbage to the super-duper strongest organisations in the history of the universe. Wow! Next.
He signed the First Step Act into law. It was real justice reform.
In just the first year of the First Step Act, over 2,000 federal prisoners had their sentences reduced by about 6 years on average, and 91% of those prisoners were black. There were also 107 extra compassionate releases, and it increased good behaviour credits by 7 days per year, which led to 3,100 further federal prisoners being freed almost immediately. Although about 800 of those 3,000 prisoners were freed to be deported by ICE, and 55% of the remaining prisoners were white. Nevertheless, the First Step Act improved the lives of thousands of prisoners. It'd be doing even better if the prisons received the extra $300 million they need to implement all its required programs, as opposed to the $23 million they just received instead. But something's better than nothing, okay? Finally, there is this claim.
The president also built the most inclusive economy ever, with record low unemployment for African Americans.
Okay, now I'm going to ignore COVID because it's basically screwed up Trump's whole record. There are now fewer black employed Americans than there were when he took over. So everything I'm about to say only goes up to February this year, okay? Right, Trump in his first 3 years and 1 month, oversaw 1.3 million jobs being created for black people. That is a 7.1% increase. Great! But in Obama's second term, in the equivalent period, he oversaw 1.75 million jobs being created for black people, which is a 10.9% increase. Now, I say second term because the beginning of Obama's first term was all recession. I'm being fair to Obama like I am being to Trump. But if you think I'm cherry picking, why don't we look at Obama's final 3 years and 1 month directly before Trump? That is 2.1 million new jobs for black people, or a 13% increase, much better than Trump did straight after. In terms of reducing unemployment, Trump saw 278,000 black people come off the unemployment rolls, a reduction of 1.7 points on the black unemployment rate, compared to a much better result under Obama, between a 4 and 5 point reduction in the black unemployment rate in his second term. And while we're at it, let's compare to Bill Clinton as well. Either of his terms, both terms under Clinton, had the same number of jobs being created for black people as Trump had, but with a much smaller population. So that was actually a 10% increase, better than Trump. And he also saw more black people coming off the unemployment rolls as well, even though he had a smaller population. In other words, even if we ignore the fact that presidents don't create jobs and we ignore what COVID's done to Trump's record, he still has not done as much for black employment than either of his two preceding Democratic presidents. But this is still not a bad record until COVID. Equally, it's true that opportunity zones are at best a work in progress. Funding for HBCUs and criminal justice reform were both spearheaded by Congress rather than the administration. But if you run all this back through the translating machine, it's not bad. It's not exactly LBJ's civil rights reforms, but it's okay. Is it enough to vote for? We'll see.
Big, beautiful world.